Ah,
All right.
okay.
All right. We're recording. Hello, everybody. Warm greetings, Ibrahim. This is the most recent, I suppose, of a whole series of interviews that Ibrahim and Kazerooni and myself have done over the years. And we'll start just by introducing ourselves. Ibrahim, will you introduce yourself, please?
Well, good evening to you, Rob, as well as good evening to our audience. My name is Ibrahim Kazerooni. I've been working with Rob for God knows many, many years on various issues to do with regional, particularly the Middle Eastern issues. And I'm originally from Iraq. I finished my doctorate at the University of Denver, and for a while I was adjunct faculty. Then I left Colorado and settled in Dearborn at the moment where I reside. My work primarily is around the community issues, religious issues, but to keep my sanity, I come and call Rob, let's organize something so I can break away from the monotonous religious and theological issues.
All right. And my name is Rob Prince. I come from a sizable Jewish family in New York City. Um, 55 years ago, I wound up in Denver. Frankly, I never dreamed I would spend that much time here. And in short order, got a job, got into a graduate program, met the woman who's going to be my future wife, and never left. I'm mostly most of the time here. I taught college, and the last quarter of a century, close to 25 years, I taught at the University of Denver's Graduate School of International Studies, which changed its name to the Corbell School of International, Joseph Corbell School of International Studies, where it's from there that I've retired, and really for a very, very long time, for reasons that I'll go into some other time, I've been a Jewish critic of Israel, of its occupation, and a supporter of Palestinian right to set up their own nation, supporter of Palestinian self-determination, a critic of Zionism. Anyhow, with that introduction, we gave a title to this talk, and the title that we have given is Perpetual War for Imaginary Peace, Washington's Foreign Policy from World War II until Today. And the fact of the matter is that if you look at it seriously, since the end of World War II, almost nonstop, the United States has been involved in wars somewhere in the world, and for much of that time, those wars have been in the Middle East. And so we want to look at both the general question: why is the United States always at war during this time period? And then specifically, what's the deal? Why all these wars, this violence in the Middle East? With that in mind, I wanted to start off with a quote, which I will give you. The quote is the following: On Tuesday, Joe Biden, who is still officially president of the United States, told the United Nations that he's working to bring a greater measure of peace and stability to the Middle East, even as the U.S. government pumps weapons into Israel so that it can continue its bloody massacres in Lebanon and Gaza. Ibrahim, okay, tell us why it is that despite this narrative of peace, that we've never really been able to see peace, and that war has been such a constant reality. One could look across the world, not just the Middle East, a world in turmoil. So let us hear what you have to say about this, Ibrahim.
Well, Rob, this question as to why we are constantly tumbling literally from one war into another, uh, although the scope of our conversation is from World War II upwards. I was reading a book called Humane: How the US Abandoned Peace and Reinvented War. This book actually goes back a couple of centuries and proves that this question that we are dealing with now for this conversation was pertinent and in the mind of people even 200 years ago, 150 years ago, although they did not go through the kind of war that we have gone through, First World War, Second World War, and have searched for an answer as to why this is so. I believe there is, if we want to find out the answer to it, number one, in my, uh, at least the number of factors, number one is the role of colonialism and hegemony, empire building, etc., etc. These are the number one factors. And particularly once they are supported by manifest destiny, American exceptionalism, that feeds this kind of desire for war, and it keeps alive the old fossilized moral claim that we have the right to rule over the world. You don't need to go, taking the example of United States, for example, from a from the beginning of its inception, 200, call it 250 years ago, 222 years, US has been going through one war or another. Starting from 1801, the war with Libya and Algeria, the Barbary War, and up to now. You can list it. And since World War II, at least 90 invasion or 80 invasion or 90 invasion going into one country and another. The problem that we have, that the hegemonic power, they don't think that they are mistaken. They simply think that this is something that they need to reform. The war needs, if it doesn't provide them with the answer, it has to be reformed. The failure, it has to be fixed.
Right.
We saw this in the case of Iraq and and all other wars. That this was an error that we need to fix it, but continue with the same mission, going from at least post World War up to now. That is a huge factor in the crisis that we have to deal with regard to this perpetual war. And the right that United States or the Western powers give to themselves to violate other countries for what you call it civilization, to civilize them or to give them democracy or give them human rights or everything else. This factor is critical. Then we can, as we go through the discussion, we can unpack a few other factors. Rob, you want to add something?
Yeah. First, a little bit about this whole idea of manifest destiny, which is really an important idea to understand. And the interesting thing about manifest destiny, it is really quite close to, if not parallel with, the Israeli notion of, quote, we're God's chosen people, Zionist ideology. But in both cases, the idea, the basis for expansion, for what is colonialist expansion, imperialist expansion, whatever you want to call it, is essentially a God-given right, a God-given right. And why did God give the American people their right to expand, or why did he give the Zionist movement their right to expand? Why? Because whether it's the American people or the Israeli people who are Zionist, that they're special, that they're unique, that they're chosen. And we have to understand that this notion of chosen people, which, I mean, there's something in it in religion, but the notion of being chosen in religion is not a political idea at all. It's not an idea of superiority or inferiority. It's frankly the heart of this idea of being chosen is simply that you recognize that there's a Lord, God our Lord, and we care for him. Using it politically, as it has been used, the chosen people, we have to understand there's no way that you can talk in those terms without being racist. Because if there's a chosen people, there are those who are not chosen. And not chosen is not simply that they're, a little bit underneath us and, not quite at the same level, that kind of, pardon my expression, garbage. It's basically, you can take that to an extreme, that the other people, the unchosen ones, are inferior. And once you yes.
If we go back to the early history of the coming of so-called the new immigrant from Europe to this country, the narrative that they used, it was biblical narrative.
It really,
they consider that the new, they
Yes.
consider that the new, I mean, the journey to be the Exodus.
Yes.
They have gone through. They are the chosen people, and this is the promised land, which they borrowed all of this from the biblical literature. And there are similarities between the mindset of the immigrant, European immigrant to this land, with exactly with the Zionist immigration to Palestine. When you do this, you become the superior race. You are the chosen one. Naturally, other people become inferior, and to the degree of subhumans.
Yes.
We heard 7th of October, immediately after, Israeli ministers or everybody else referring to Palestinians as subhumans.
Yes.
The people who came from Europe, the immigrants, they referred to the Native Americans as savages. And by constructing this asymmetrical relationship between themselves and the native, naturally, you open up not just the race, the fact that you can eliminate them, you can destroy them, and everything else. Go ahead.
Okay, there's two. It was important to have that discussion because it is really a ideological basis for a lot of the stuff we're talking about. But in a more concrete fashion, the United States, since the end of World War II, unquestionably it emerges as a dominant power, and you can call it. It has different names. So a more, if you like, polite, and I might say a little vaguer notion is the idea of hegemony. The United States emerges as a hegemonic power. The notion of hegemony is quite specific, actually. It means dominance, economic, political, and cultural dominance. It is, and the question is how, for the United States, how to maintain that that dominance. Now, some of that, the maintenance of that dominance is, through cultural things, film, the ways in which America is, kind of magnified, if you like, in importance culturally. But if we get really down to it, the heart of the matter is U.S. control of global resources and global economic processes. Now, without a long explanation, for from let's say approximately 1945 to, I don't know, the mid 1970s, somewhere around that, is quite clear that there was no challenge whatsoever to American power. And also that the US was the biggest manufacturing producer in the world. That changes in the 1970s, not dramatically, but enough so that we have reached the point where rather than expanding based on economic efficiency and providing a political model, that in order to maintain its hegemony, the United States has had to be defensive. And defensiveness really means a couple of things. It means sanctions. And before the United States was sanctioning Iran and Russia and China, it was sanctioning Japan and Germany because they began to compete. So part of what we're talking about here is trying to stop the growth of other countries' challenges, economic challenges. And then part of it, of course, is military. And if we look at the heart of U.S. military intervention, whether it's Vietnam, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Latin America, what we're really talking about is control of resources. And of course, in the Middle East, the resources are strategic, of second to none: oil, natural gas, whatever. So that's one part of what's happening here. And in order to maintain that power, that control, that hegemony, the United States has engaged in warfare, and as often and frequently as you had said. So that's the first point.
I would like to engage statistics that underscores what we are talking about. This is according to the 2022 Stockholm International Peace Research Institute,
right.
SIPRI. It has a report that the United States led the way with 38% of the world total, in expenditure on military.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And $801 billion, the budget, the military budget.
Yeah.
The distant second was China with 293, followed by India with 76.6, United Kingdom 68.4, Russia 65.9. Europe's collective expenditure rose to 418, compared to United States 801.
And that is incredible.
That is what they have declared it. The amount of budget for the military that is hidden in various bills and so on that passes Congress, we don't know about. This is why in Julian Cribb, in a book or an article that he wrote, he contextualizes these levels of military expenditure effectively when he asks the question, might be defined that species, we as human beings, are species which spends 34 times more on what better way to kill themselves or ourselves than it does better way to feed itself.
Right.
That says quite a lot about where we are as far as military budgets for war.
A couple of just brief comments on this, Ibrahim. You know, this $800 billion figure for the U.S. military budget. There are certain hidden budgets that are not even included in it. So a lot of the stuff that the intelligence agencies deal with, we don't know what they are. We don't know their budget. But there's something else that takes this figure way above $1 trillion a year. And that is, it does not include the maintenance and the production of nuclear weapons. That is a separate budget, which is comes out of the Department of Energy. So the figure, the 800 billion figure, is actually quite a modest figure. All right, so that's the first point. Then there was a second point I wanted to make. So the first point about all these wars is the United States is trying to maintain its hegemony, maintain its empire at a time when its economic efficiency and dominance in the world is declining, and that's just a fact. The second thing that I notice about these forever wars, there are a number of wars, and here we could talk about the Middle East, but we could talk about other places too, like Vietnam, where the United States is engaged in a war, and then the war ends. But the war ends formally, but the United States still does what it can do to continue to weaken the country that was its opposition. Syria comes to mind. The United States and its proxies have lost the war in Syria. But the United States still, even after losing that war in Syria, that proxy war in Syria, what does it do? It establishes a military base in northeast Syria. It steals Syria's oil and wheat. And really, all that is about is being a sore loser and trying to exhaust, if you like, and make more difficult any kind of reconstruction. And we see that same kind of model of trying to exhaust U.S. adversaries. That's what the U.S. is basically doing with Russia right now, and what it's quite clear to me what it hopes to do with China as well, and all that is to try to.
And by the way, the same policy.
Power. What?
Yeah, the same policy. In 1980, the son of Menachem Begin was asked regarding the settlement in West Bank and the two-state solution. He said the settlements per se, they don't have any geopolitical value beyond making it difficult for the Palestinians to establish a credible state for themselves. That idea that the United States is using for weakening the possibility of Syria going back to a full control, or Iraq going back to full control, or somewhere else going back to full control, or Yemen going back to full control, is once they have lost the war, then the war of attrition starts.
Yes.
That literally grind these people to the hop to weaken them, so that it becomes easier for the United States to control.
All right, so we're talking about global trends, but Ibrahim, how do some of these ideas, which we're kind of trying to develop, the rationale for forever wars, how does it play out in the Middle East?
Well, one of the reasons why we have such crisis in the Middle East is, again, hegemony plays a major part right from the beginning. What you have in the Middle East, people such as Rashid Khalidi, as well as Edward Said and others, have argued about settler state. That what we have during the time of the either you call it surrogate colonialism or settler colonialism, that the British government allowed this to take place as an extension of the arm of the Western hegemonic power in the region. So that issue still dominates, but the feeding factor into this is the role of natural resources that the United States intends to control. If you remember, Henry Kissinger in 1973 made a comment. We may laugh about the comment now. He said they told him that, well, they have oil. He said, no, it's our oil that happens to be under their feet by historical accident.
Yeah, a great quote. Yeah.
Yes, by historical accident. So this notion, the role that the natural resources have, the regional natural resources, huge amount of oil that United States not only wants it for itself, it wants to control it so that the adversaries will not be able to access it. In the 1991 war against Iraq, the United States, George Bush, the senior, made a comment. He said, we cannot allow Iraq to control, say, certain amount of oil in Kuwait, because there is always the possibility that this amount of oil will be accessible by our enemies, China. So
Right.
we have to have full control over the production in the region, so we know who's going to get it and deny it from our enemies. So, in my opinion, not only hegemony and colonialism mindset and everything else that we have talked about so far, but natural resources play
Yes.
a major part.
Okay. So
If we go, I think once before, Rob, we talked about this. In 1973, after 1973 increase in the oil prices, Kissinger had a meeting with the Shah of Iran, and they decided to. We have no. This was exact comment. We have no objection to the price of oil to be risen, so long as two things happen. Number one, 1/3 of the profit that you make will be invested in United States banks. The second third will be invested in United States companies.
right.
The third will be invested in United States banks
And the U.S. dollar.
and US dollars.
Yes.
So this natural resources and how the regional natural resources could be used to support and strengthen dollars and economic position of United States is also extremely critical.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I call that the Kissinger deal.
Yeah.
And it really was the construction of something by an evil genius. Basically, what is it that Kissinger was doing? We're going to give you the Arab sheikdoms or the Shah a bigger cut in your oil wealth, on the condition that most of that wealth returns one way or another to the West, and specifically to the United States. And that was brilliant. A comment and then a question for you, Ibrahim. I want to go back to that comment you made about the settlements, and the settlements having no strategic importance whatsoever, other than to make it impossible or more difficult, for the Palestinians to achieve their national homeland. We're living in a world where actual territory, the seizure of territory, becomes less and less and less important. When you think of the great powers of the world, I mean, even think of Britain during the height of British colonialism. All right, and even in that period, and certainly now, the actual seizure of land was, i.e., a direct colonialism. Did it happen? Yes, but most colonialism, even then, was indirect. Was indirect, i.e., you didn't need to conquer land. And in a global economy like ours, the actual seizure of land is irrelevant. A country like Israel, that's trying to be this high-tech country, whatever, another seizing the West Bank or Gaza, what is that going to add to its wealth? And I've never really bought into this argument that it was really that strategic. So I think that's a really good point that you raised. That why are they doing it then? And you answered that one.
During the past year, Rob, it transpired that there was huge amount of gas and natural resources, both offshore and inland,
in the Eastern Mediterranean,
Mediterranean and inland. So there is a possibility of what we call the economic factor or component here. And for the Zionist project expansion, the goal is from establishment of what they call State of Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates. That is recently we began to hear this in the literature coming out. Even ministers in the cabinet talked about it and presented this bigger, greater Israel that covers from Nile to the Euphrates and up to Turkey and northern part of Arabian Peninsula. But from the tactical point of view, Israel needs extra land, fertile land. They talk about, for example, this southern Litani River. If you go back to the proposal the Zionists put to the French government in 1908, the prospected land that they wanted to include into the state was up to Litani River, because they had the access to fertile land and everywhere else, and everything else, water and everything else. So there is an element of economics here, and there is an element of potential expansion and biblical right and biblical construction, etc. It's a complex issue, but whatever happens, they don't want the Palestinians to have a viable opportunity for them to establish themselves.
Okay. What we've talked about is kind of the rationales for both global and regional, for both for U.S.-Israeli policy in the region. But we're seeing a fight back, aren't we? A kind of a fight back that neither Israel nor the United States is used to. I mean, this war now has lasted for more than a year. This is no war in the Middle East since 1948 has lasted this long. So can you talk just a little bit about, well, what is this axis of resistance that we're just now beginning to hear, at least in our media here in the U.S., in a very negative way? What are they, and why is this coming together of this alliance making it much more difficult for Israel, both militarily and politically?
Professor Saeed Abu Khalil, an American Lebanese professor of political science, recently was interviewed. He is a Lebanese origin, and he gave an example I believe it's pertinent for us to present it and make a comparison between, say, 1968 and now. 1968, Israeli forces landed in Beirut airport and literally blew up all the civilian aeroplanes that Lebanon had, because you can go online and see it. Because they said that Lebanon should not have any civilian airlines. The presence of Lebanese civilian airlines is a danger to Israel. United States is training the Lebanese army, but ineffectively. They really are policemen. They are not able to defend the country. The past 3 weeks, that was in 1968, and now 2024, so many years later, during the past 3 weeks, the Israeli army, with all the sophisticated weapons and all the technology, cannot even move more than half a kilometers into Lebanese land. Yeah. Nearly 180 kilometers border, and they cannot move half a kilometers into it. They have been beaten repeatedly, and they retreat. That shows that the axis of the presence of a unique, powerful force in the region that changes the dynamic of the relationship between Lebanese, Israelis, as well as Gaza. You said it, Rob. Who could imagine 2 years ago that Gaza, a concentration camp that has been deprived of everything, literally, that they have to get tunnels into Egypt to get even a little bit of food, can be able to resist over a year and so on, constant onslaught with all the weapons that the United States provides, despite claiming peace, by tons and tons and tons of weapons that the United States. It shows that the situation has changed.
Yes. There's another aspect to what's going on there, more global aspect, um, but it's also part of this kind of U.S. defending its hegemony kind of thing, and that is, as long as there's this kind of instability and war in the Middle East, it makes it very difficult for China and Russia to develop their Belt and Road Initiative, in which the Middle East is going to be a key zone, and actually its prosperity could be enhanced quite a bit from this. And so, on some level, when we talk about permanent war or forever war, however you want to put it, part of it is to keep this region in enough turmoil so that the economic benefits from the Belt and Road Initiative, and then the Russians have their own initiative, a North-South initiative that goes into the Middle East.
You are right,
It's
Rob.
impossible to develop.
Yeah, you are right, but the Chinese and the Russians have developed a counter strategy, and what I call it the salami tactic, slice by slice. Instead of getting major projects, they take one country at a time and create the stable environment within that country, promise them infrastructure building and so on, and bring them into their own sphere of influence. Iran is now one of them, BRICS and everything else. And even they showed the new unit of monetary unit, which is in the recent meeting, Putin was holding it in his hand to replace $100. They're going to do it. So the salami tactic, slice by slice, the Chinese, the Russians, slowly but meticulously bringing all these countries one by one into the equation, and now their influence into Africa and Southern America.
Yes. All right, Ibrahim, we've gone on for how long? Almost a little bit more than a half hour. We try to keep these discussions limited, not to go on too much longer. Do you have any at this moment where we know, I mean, the horrors that are continuing in Gaza every day, the Israel's extension of the war into Lebanon, it hitting Syria all the time, attacking Yemen. Is there hope for the future here that somehow we can reverse this stampede towards war and begin with some kind of ceasefire and political process that can, kind of dampen down and resolve some of these issues?
I think, being an optimist, I would say yes, there is a possibility. Being a realist, I would say no. Because for concrete change requires fundamental shift. And yes, so long as what we have manifest destiny and somehow God-given right to civilize the rest of the world, and we are not prepared to shift from that position, then the empire building continues, which has to be supported by military, and military needs the theaters of war, and it becomes a racket.
Okay. I wanted to finish with a number of years ago, I had the good fortune to go to Los Angeles and to meet with what is a significant Tunisian Jewish community that is in Los Angeles. And at the time, things were pretty rough in Tunisia. And I remember asking this Tunisian Jewish friend, who really a sweetheart, are things going to improve in Tunisia? And I could see he was thinking, how can I answer this briefly? That long. And this is what he said. He said, Rob, first it's going to get worse, and then it's going to get better. So I hope that's the same. All right. On that note, Ibrahim, it's a pleasure once again, and hopefully we'll do this again in the near future.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to everyone.
Signing off to all your friends. Okay, here we go.
All right.